Introduction to Suspension Training. So the objectives of this presentation are to introduce suspension systems training and highlight some of the potential benefits and considerations of training with suspension systems. The digital presentations are hosted on the LMS. It can be viewed from this platform on any device and include suspension system equipment and safety, training theory and functional training theory, suspension system training theory, and then the practical modules covering exercises 1 on the upper body, exercises 2 on the lower body, 3 on core and also stretches, and then application with suspension system training programming. For each of these presentations, you should work through the guided practice, trying each of the exercises and variations. So suspension systems work by using the client's body weight as the main load or the main intensity, and with different positions this load can be increased or decreased easily in order to accommodate progression or varying abilities. So we would classify suspension training as effectively body weight manipulation training. Other modern equipment that can utilize body weight manipulation would include things like BOSUs and stability balls. Now, body weight training will be a useful and valid way to train the body, and the benefit of using a suspension system is that the intensity can very easily be increased or decreased without the need for additional load, such as holding a free weight like a kettlebell or a dumbbell. When we look at comparative exercises, so for example the hamstring leg curl on a suspension system, it is superior because we can progress and regress the intensity, unlike what most would consider the same exercise on a stability ball. So the use of ropes and gymnastic rings have been used since the mid-1800s as a modality for training. It's only been in the last number of years that specialist suspension systems have come onto the market. The TRX is probably the most well-known of these, specifically designed suspension systems. But others would include the Jungle Gym XT by Lifelines USA, the Milo Kit by SAQ, and the Bodyweight Gym by Xenios. The differences between these different systems and the setup instructions are included in the setup and equipment presentation as part of that module. So suspension systems are very versatile pieces of functional training equipment with a huge variety of potential exercises that will work the upper body, lower body and core muscles through many of the different human movement patterns. They can also be integrated with a variety of other equipment, as mentioned before, such as kettlebells, dumbbells, sandbags, weighted vests, etc. Some of the key benefits for suspension system training would include submaximal bodyweight loading, increased synergist overload and improved agonist to synergist strength balance, the fact that they're multi-planar, portability, and for improvements in functional range. We'll have a look at each of these and explain each of these in more detail now. So in regards to this submaximal bodyweight loading, well, before applying additional load, the ability to efficiently move your own body weight is always a good starting point for anyone commencing a structured exercise program. Many people move from fixed path machines and progress straight into free weights and cables, but without necessarily developing a good strength base with just their own body weight for resistance. As a result, suspension system trainings are an excellent way of improving this strength endurance with a kind of sub-maximal resistance of just body weight. So the next benefit we'll look at is increased synergist overload and improved agonist to synergist strength balance. So there's a few little terms I need to kind of explain there. What synergists are, what the agonists are, etc. So for many individuals, a limiting factor for their success or their ability to perform different movement patterns is actually a strength imbalance. Normally we talk about strength imbalances kind of like front to back, biceps to triceps, things like that. In this case, we're referring to a strength imbalance between the agonists, which are also called the prime movers, and the synergists, so various assistant muscles. And this may be the core, this may be the hip stabilizers, maybe the shoulder stabilizers, even the grip. So I'll give you a quick example of this. Let's say that you have really strong chest muscles and tricep muscles, which are going to be the prime mover for pressing. And when you're lying on your back, doing like a chest press with dumbbells, that's absolutely fine. Those are generally going to be some of the limiting factors. Problem that you may encounter is when you flip over onto your front and do a press up, your chest is strong, triceps are strong, but your core imbalance is actually significantly weaker. And so we see maybe your hip sag, or it actually kind of takes a lot of the energy to try to stabilize your core because you're quite weak there, and therefore you can't really kind of show the same level of strength. So what we look to do is, and the reason we tend to find this with a lot of individuals is because they do a lot of fixed path training. Very good for improving the strength of the agonists, the prime movers, but unfortunately it doesn't always concurrently improve the strength of these other stabilizing muscles. So many of the suspension exercises will kind of flip it the other way. They'll heavily recruit the core stabilizers and some of the hips and shoulders as well. And so these exercises can be used to help correct their strength imbalance. It kind of swings the pendulum the other way. So it will overload these stabilizers. And this will help to correct the strength imbalance for improved functional capacity. Because of the instability of the suspension system, it will stimulate more synergist overload. Like we said, core stabilizers are going to switch on more, hip stabilizers with certain exercises are going to switch on more, the shoulder scapular stabilizers like the rotator cuff, and even the grip. It kind of depends on the exercise to which ones will switch on, but they are going to switch on more with suspension system generally as a mode of training than with more stable fixed path machines and even some of the kind of stable free weight exercises. So when we look at this in application, take some standard dip bars. They're going to be more stable. So what you're going to find is you're going to get less activation by some of the stabilizers. They're still, for example, the rotator cuff is still going to be required to activate and stabilize, but because it's a stable surface, it will be somewhat less. Hence, usually you're going to be able to perform more repetitions on that stable surface. If you take exactly the same exercise, but you do it on an unstable surface, in this case, on a suspension training system, maybe gymnastic rings, and you do dips on that, you're going to find, because there's going to be an increase in the overload of these stabilizing muscles around the shoulder, the rotator cuff, and the scapula, again, rotator cuff, trapezius, rhomboids, etc., that even with the same load, your body weight, because that hasn't changed, you are only going to be able to perform slightly less repetitions on the unstable versus the stable exercise. So as long as you're kind of aware of that, what we tend to find is that you can even use it as a bit of a screening tool, is if you take two people and they can do the same number of dips with the same body weight on a stable surface like the dip bars, and then you look at what each of them can do on, let's say, a suspension system, that gives you an indication of the level or the degree of their strength imbalance. With a side plank, same applies. Body weight is the same, the body angle may be the same. But the feet, when they're placed in a suspension system, will make the exercise far more unstable. And this is going to increase the activation of the core and the hip stabilizers, and it's going to make that exercise feel a lot more challenging. So we can use suspension system training for multi-planar improvement. So there are a variety of multi-planar or exercises which work the body in different planes of motion that are possible with a suspension system, which means that you can get, in particular, a lot more frontal plane and a lot more transverse plane overload than a lot of people usually do within their standard exercise program. And this is good to be able to complement generally the kind of sagittal exercises that most people perform within their gym-based sessions. So portability is another benefit, and suspension training systems are lightweight, easy to transport, making them a suitable tool for personal trainers that work their clients in their own homes or outdoors, or just for clients looking at traveling away on business or holidays that want to continue to do some kind of structured exercise whilst they're away from a gym. So suspension systems are going to be very good for improving functional range, and in our functional training philosophy, which is, we go through in a lot more in the functional training theory module, the suspension training systems are going to be more appropriate for improving what we refer to as functional range, effectively the breadth of our ability to perform a functional movement pattern. And that just kind of means, for example, if you're doing a lift, the different ways you can perform a lift. Can you do it fast? Can you do it on an unstable surface? More strength endurance with an unstable load, things like that, rather than looking at improving the functional applied strength, which is the maximum load lifted or force possible for each movement pattern. So if you want to improve, and these are kind of two different attributes or capabilities, if you like, in relation to your ability to perform a different movement pattern. What we're saying is suspension training systems are going to be better at improving more the functional range. Other more stable, heavier type exercises, maybe with a barbell, are going to be better at improving more the functional applied strength. So for the warm-up, it's a good idea to start with about a 5-minute or so warm-up consisting of bodyweight drills to work the body through as many movement patterns as possible, whilst also elevating the heart rate, temperature, and including mobilization of the joints. In particular, with suspension training, you want to focus on mobilizing hip flexors, which generally tighten a lot of people, also hip rotators and shoulder muscles, and also looking at getting the core to activate. So get it to switch on and fire, but we don't want to fatigue the core prematurely prior to using it within the session. And so those are the goals within our kind of warm-up, if you like. A warm-up example may consist of certain kind of non-suspension exercises like angry cat mobilizations, 90-90 mobilizations, standing rotations, etc. And then we may also kind of progress into utilizing things like the lunge with chest flies, lunge and overhead reach, squats, step and overhead reach, a crossover step and overhead reach from more the frontal plane. But we're trying to get the body working as many different movement patterns as possible in all three planes of motion, and trying to get all these muscles switched on, get the temperature raised prior to performing the main session. For a cool down, generally kind of follow our standard recommendations. You want to finish off with a 3 or 4 minute cool down consisting of some static stretches, focusing on the key muscles that you've worked during that session. Each stretch should be held for approximately 10 to 15 seconds. You can hold them for longer, and you can utilize different techniques as well. And a lot of the static end positions for many of the exercises covered in the session can be used for static stretches. And we'll show you some of these on the following slide. So for example, you could do a split kneeling hip flexor stretch, standing quad, standing pec, standing lat, hamstring, lateral core and TFL. I'm going to show you some of these positions at the end of the core exercise presentation as well, just so you can kind of see some of the application. This is not necessarily the only stretches you can do, and you may well be able to utilize some of the other exercises or positions in order to perform static stretches on other areas of the body. So session variation, you want to look to vary your sessions on a very regular basis. Research shows that to avoid acclimatization, or effectively the body adapting and getting used to the sessions that you're doing and therefore getting less benefit, that with most people you want to significantly vary the sessions about every 5 to 7 sessions. So you could follow the same session for maybe on average, let's say 6 times, and then you'd want to have a bit of an overhaul and change things around. If you deliver different sessions on different times a day, then again, like we said, you want to look to change the session about every 6 weeks. Continuing to deliver the same session for prolonged periods will mean that the attendees will get less benefit from it. In regards to teaching, well, once you're happy with each exercise yourself, it is then important that you consider how best to teach or coach these exercises to others. The exercise presentations will give details on key coaching points and cues you should use when teaching. And always try to keep it simple though, so as not to overload the learner with too much information. You also want to take into account the individual's learning style, their goals, level of motivation, their individual structural limitations, motor skill level, and their core, hip, shoulder or grip stability endurance, which may be a key limiting factor during training. So the objectives of this presentation were to introduce suspension system training and highlight some of the potential benefits and considerations of training with suspension systems. You should now complete the review questions for this presentation, ensure you met the learning outcomes, and then log the observation of this presentation and the date for your online submission.